If all members have had the opportunity of casting their votes, I ask the greffier to close the voting. I can announce that the proposition has been adopted unanimously, 35 votes for, and accordingly, Paul Dossett has been appointed Comptroller and Auditor General for 7 years with effect from 1st of January next. The next item is assess affordability of qualifying state pensioners receiving home care allowance, lodged by Deputy Andrews. The main respondent is the Minister for Social Security. I ask the greffier to read the proposition.
The States are asked to decide whether they are of opinion to request the Minister for Social Security, A, to ascertain the number of old age pensioners caring for someone with high-level care needs who would be entitled to receive home carers allowance and the state's pension, should the home carers allowance be exempt from the Social Security Overlapping Benefits Jersey Order 1975, and to report the findings by the 31st of December 2026. B, to assess, in conjunction with the Minister for Treasury and Resources, whether the Social Security Reserve Fund can be utilised sustainably to supplement the Social Security Fund in paying both the state pension and the home carers allowance to persons identified in A. And C, should the use of the Social Security Reserve Fund be assessed as sustainable, to include within the Budget Government Plan 2028 to 2031 the necessary transfer of funds from the Social Security Reserve Fund to the Social Security Fund to provide for the expansion of the home carers allowance to persons identified in A.
Deputy Andrews.
Thank you very much, sir. In bringing forward this proposition, I am bringing forward something that is indeed a manifesto pledge of mine. I'm of the firm belief, sir, that carers who are providing high-level home care for somebody else should be in receipt of the home carers allowance. There are many pensioners out there who are devoted and dedicated, providing full-time care, sometimes into the hours of the night, caring for somebody in their moment of need. Now, I know there will be some proponents who will be saying, well, the home carers allowance is designated for persons of a working age, and potentially if they are still continuing care until pensionable age, they've then got the option to either decide upon taking their state pension, or the second option is they can continue with receiving the home carers allowance. And what I would say to that is we need to be appreciative of the care that many people are providing. It's unpaid. Many people have sacrificed a great deal. They're of a pensionable age. They're in that period in their life where they should be enjoying what should be their free time. But instead, sometimes things happen. And you need to take responsibility to care for a loved one. Now, many people in this States Assembly will definitely be of the view that they're either in support of or potentially against pretty much already. I know that. But for me, I am somebody who holds the belief that this proposition is something that could realistically implement change to exempt the home carers allowance from the overlapping benefits order to permit pensioners to receive both the state pension and the home carers allowance. So turning to the comments paper, the Council of Ministers, they predicated there's 20,000 pensioners, and it would be impractical to be looking into the potential of carrying out assessments across all persons of a pensionable age. And I have to say, sir, I disagree with that, because it's only going to be the people who would be entitled to receive HCA who would need to be assessed. We must also remember, sir, that many pensioners are already in residential care who have high-level needs, who've moved on from living at home and they've moved to that next stage where care is provided at a more significant cost. And so for me, looking at the long run, we've really got to be looking at government expenditure, and more particular, you've got to be looking at the social expenditure that will be incurred. And there's definitely a need, sir, politically, to ensure that people are staying in their homes for longer, being cared for. I think it's morally right because for so many people, it must be difficult. Once they reach that stage, they then have to go into a home. And it's difficult enough when you've lived in your home for many years, and then because you are unable, for whatever reason, to remain at home, you then have to move away and be in residential care. And of course, that is a significant cost to the state as well. So part of this proposition is about procuring long-term savings so people can remain in their home, and it will also be more affordable as well. Now, I know the Council of Ministers have mentioned social security contributions could potentially increase. Well, the whole purpose of this proposition is we look at the investment income from the Social Security Reserve Fund to potentially supplement the Social Security Fund. Now, we must bear in mind, with the Social Security Fund, it also receives a state's grant. That's general taxation from the consolidated fund that's then transferred across to the Social Security Fund. And the reason being is to enhance the welfare state, because if we're just purely relying on social contributions, the social welfare state would ordinarily become more diminutive. Therefore, to try and enhance the provision of transfer policies, transfer payment policies, we need to ensure that the state's grant is paid in full. Now, the Council of Ministers have taken it upon themselves in the recent government budget to partially withhold the state's grant to facilitate additional government expenditure. And this is, of course, something that many political commentators have had a view on, because we've seen the government take a very much fiscally expansionary approach when we ought to be probably a bit more conservative in the way how we manage things within the public sector. So because the investment income for 2026 of 142 million has been partially supplemented to the Social Security Fund, it in essence means the Social Security Reserve Fund, in terms of its value, will not increase as much, because transfers have been made from the Social Security Reserve Fund into the Social Security Fund. And this is something that will carry on all the way through to 2029. And that is problematic, because I think had the state's grant been paid in full, then we'd have use of between 142 and 162 million per annum between 2026 and 2029. And some of that could partially be used to afford additional HCA claimants. Now, Part A of the proposition is all about making sure that things are assessed in full. We need to have an understanding of how many people would be entitled to receive HCA. Only then will we know how much we need to then transfer from the reserve fund into the Social Security Fund. So we need to base this on evidence. So I was a bit disappointed in that respect when the Minister stated that, look, if it was a case that 500 people would be entitled, it would cost 7.5 million. Well, if it costs 7.5 million, take into account the investment return on the Social Security Reserve Fund of 142 million. I'm sorry, but that is definitely a policy that is affordable, in my personal view. I know colleagues will have a different opinion to me in that respect, and they're perfectly entitled to it. But I also want to now turn to some of the transfers that will be made from the Social Security Reserve Fund due to the withholding of the state's grant, and that's the partial withholding. In 2026, 64 million is being transferred into the Social Security Fund. Meanwhile, the state's grant is being partially withheld to facilitate additional government expenditure that we can ill afford, and I think many people are fully aware of that. You just need to be looking at the Fiscal Policy Panel reports. Now, we also need to take into account the investment return on the Social Security Reserve Fund from an empirical perspective. So the average annual return over the last 5 years has been 9.3%, with a 7.3% average over a 10-year period. Now, that is pretty good. In actual fact, for most years, it's exceeding the rate of inflation, so the reserve is generating a positive real return. And I think that is something of a positive for the Treasury Minister, who obviously isn't at the moment in the room, but I think that is considerable progress that has been made. Over a 12-year period, sir, the forecasts show that the fund is going to grow by 1.2 billion. And here we are with some politicians saying, well, no, we cannot afford additional HCA. Well, we need evidence to argue that case, and unfortunately, evidence has not been provided. The whole basis of this proposition is for it to be definitely a data-gathering exercise with the prospect of implementing policy that will have a meaningful benefit to pensioners, to reward them for the care that they carry out for loved ones. Because I've had many people contact me, and they are in support of reform. They really are. And that's not the political party, by the way. They're in support of... no, they're in... potentially. but you know, they are advocating reform. You know, there is a great deal of frustration. You know, in my own family, I had a relative who was in receipt of HCA for probably about 3 or 4 years, and for them it was a case of having to give up work. But had my other relative gone into residential care, it would have cost a fortune, probably well in the region of £500,000 to £600,000. So there was savings being made there, 6-figure savings, and this is something that we need to be more attentive to, not just politicians, but also policy officials as well. Now, I've taken a bit of time to look through the States Assembly search engine, and there was one question that really stood out for me, and I felt very, very sorry for the individual who Deputy Tadia was mentioning. And he was speaking on behalf of a constituent who had not left the island for 7 years. And he asked a question of the Social Security Minister about whether they would be, at the time, in support of allowing pensioners to receive the state pension as well as HCA. And the response at the time was no, and that was the previous Social Security Minister. But I think it's come to the time now where it is possible. We can do this. We can enable change. And I think the public would be delighted to see this reform. Obviously, Guernsey has adopted a change where they decided that they would do away with the overlapping benefits rule. The UK has maintained the overlapping benefits rule, but there is a small supplementation for carers who are low-income earners. I think it's about £83 or less than they receive HCA to make up the difference. So for me, as a politician, this is something that is crucial. It's a must. This proposition has to be delivered. It has to. You know, we should see the next States Assembly being reconstituted, and it will be up to them to then hopefully adopt change, and that would be a legislative change, but it would also ensure that pensioners are getting paid for the high-level care that they provide for loved ones. So I make the proposition, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy. Is the proposition seconded? Yes. Thank you. Does anyone speak on the proposition? Minister.
Thank you, sir. Firstly, I'd like to say that I do understand why Deputy Andrews may think that putting this proposition forward was a good idea. I know that members do want to ensure that carers who provide such important support for their loved ones are well supported, and additionally also want to make sure that pensioners do not find themselves living under financial strain. Support for carers and those being cared for is a priority for me, Before becoming Minister, I did bring a successful budget amendment to provide financial assistance to parents of children with life-limiting illnesses. There was a clear gap there, and I'm pleased that the Assembly supported me in addressing it. Since taking office as Minister for Social Security, I have focused on delivering outcomes that improve support and being proactive in terms of introducing change where it can be made, and such as, for example, increasing access to home protection responsibility credits and how they can be used by parents who have two children close together. But also working on longer term projects, such as modernising our outdated disability benefit, the long-term incapacity allowance. So when the Deputy's proposition came to me, I did genuinely give serious consideration as to whether I could support any part of it. And I concluded that I could not, as the proposition is neither efficient or effective. It assumes a solution to a problem that isn't clear. In relation to Part A, my team has already put in a request to Statistics Jersey for questions on caring to be included in the 2026 Jersey Opinions and Lifestyle Survey. This is both an efficient and effective and statistically valid method for collecting data to inform the future Minister about the real needs of carers. The methodology that would be required to meet the request in Part A of this proposition would take significant officer time, which would put a stop to the very practical and needs-based work that they are already undertaking. Sir, the proposition only focuses on a single benefit and a single demographic of carer. It ignores the many different types of caring situations, the complexity of those arrangements, and fundamentally the needs of the person being cared for, which also need to be placed front and centre alongside support for carers. The proposition does nothing to improve support for pensioner carers in the short term and will not improve the financial situation for low-income pension-aged carers without another change to income support rules. And that's something very important to remember. Even if we effected this change in years to come, this change would not be a financial benefit to low-income pension carers. And it also wouldn't be of any benefit to working-aged pension carers. And we know from previous JOL surveys, people of working age are more likely to be in financial distress than pensioners. I have spoken in my comments about the impact on the Social Security Fund. I'm conscious that I also have a scrutiny sub-panel that recently published their review, which is also looking at asking me to expand another benefit, the parental benefit. So what I have done is asked officers, we have the actuarial review already planned for the Social Security Fund. That's a major review that should inform future decisions. And I've asked for agnostic advice to be considered around what any increase in any benefits may well cost to the fund in the future. So, for example, when we introduced the parental allowance changes, there was also an increase in contributions made at that time. It's really important that when we discuss increases in benefits, we understand how we're going to be paying for them. I also wanted to touch on the things that we already are doing in response to the review that I completed earlier this year. Work is happening at pace, it's happening at a practical level. We already, last month now, in February, put in place a dedicated advisor to provide carers with individual advice and direct them to support services that are already available for them. I would encourage members, if they are in contact with constituents who are carers, who need help and support and financial advice, that they should contact that dedicated officer. That will also give us information about where there are gaps in the system and enable us to make changes in the short term. We've also improved our page on the Government of Jersey website, and I'm pleased to say that there's now a dedicated page on the website to bring information together for all carers and people being cared for. And also I will give a plug while I have the opportunity for the Connect Me event on the 17th of March, which is also a dedicated event for carers. But going and talking about the practical improvements that we are able to make, I have recently made changes to the way that long-term care support can be provided through the conversation that I had with some carers. We saw that there was some weaknesses in the system, particularly where people were moving through into adulthood. We're working on a practical basis across government as well on our pathways into adulthood for people with disabilities. And also, I'm more than happy to work with any member who brings forward other ideas around how we can better support carers. And I was pleased to have Deputy Miles, as I've said previously in previous sittings, come to our Disability and Inclusion Advisory Group recently, bringing her ideas of how we can provide very practical financial support for carers with adult children, and we continue to be working on that. So while I understand Deputy Andrews is coming from a good place, wanting to genuinely help people, unfortunately this proposition doesn't provide that help. It runs the risk actually of taking officer time away from the things that we are doing, that carers are asking us for. My one further point that I did want to make is that consistently when we speak to carers and carer organisations, the change to home carers allowance isn't something that is being asked for as a direct need. The one vital thing that carers, and I think this alludes actually to the question that Deputy Tadia may have been asking at the time, is actually around respite care for carers. That is a critical need. It's something that in my report I've asked and urged the next minister to make a priority. We already do have respite breaks being paid for long-term care, but we know that there is a shortage of respite facilities. It's work like that that my team need to be focused on, and I wouldn't want a proposition such as this from taking away my officers from working on those things that carers have already asked for and desperately need. So Sarah, I urge the Assembly to vote against this proposition.
Thank you, Minister. Deputy Miles.
Thank you, sir, and I'm pleased to follow the Minister for Social Security, and I just have a very short speech. And I want to begin also by recognising the intention behind this proposition, that the deputies clearly brought it forward because of a genuine concern for unpaid carers, particularly those who provide care later in their own lives. And given my long personal and third sector experience, that is a concern that I share. So we know that unpaid carers make an enormous contribution to our community, and many provide constant care for loved ones, often at considerable personal sacrifice. And their work is usually unseen, but it is absolutely vital. So for that reason, I have a great deal of sympathy with the motivation behind this proposition. But I don't believe that proposals set out by the Deputy represent the right approach. And it is for that reason that sadly, I can't support them. I've spoken on several occasions in this Assembly about the, in my view, bizarre and unfair rule about adult children with additional needs who choose to live with their parents in the family home, not being entitled to the rental component of income support. And I would also confirm that I've been working closely with the Minister for Social Security on related issues within the benefits system, particularly to ensure that eligible adults receive the financial support that they're entitled to, And I think that is the right way to address this problem that the bringer of the proposition seeks to address. We need to address the income of the beneficiaries in order to better support the home carers rather than the other way around. So making sure the system works fairly is something that I care deeply about. And we are making progress, albeit slow progress. It is progress nonetheless. So I fully recognise the concern that lies behind this proposition and the desire to ensure that carers receive the support they deserve. But I'm not convinced that this approach would produce the right benefit in the short term, and it risks placing additional long-term pressure on the Social Security Fund. So for those reasons, whilst I sympathise strongly with the Deputy and his intention behind the proposition, I won't be supporting that today. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Deputy. Deputy Barbara Ward.
Thank you, sir. I'm really delighted that the Deputy has brought this proposition for debate. For me, it's most welcome, and I've been wanting this to be incorporated for many, many years, and I must declare my full support of this proposition. When I was backbencher and I was on the health scrutiny panel, it was raised then with the then Social Security Minister, and it was also about the long-term care, and there was going to be looking at that. We heard nothing. I have raised it with our present Social Security Minister and the Chief Minister. I mean, it must be like a broken record with those two individuals, of which I make no apologies, because I feel very passionate that we should be doing something about this allowance. It may be just a change of the law, because the Social Security law will not pay out two benefits. There appears to be some reluctance in certain areas to take a really serious look and have a conversation with the government actuary to assess the cost of actually providing some recognition payment to our voluntary unpaid carers, aside to their well-earned contributory old age pension. I cannot see why one has to choose one allowance or the other, just because the law says you can't have both. Why hasn't the law been changed, sir? As a government, it was agreed at the last budget to withhold monies. When you add up investments and everything else, it must be nearing £400 million over the next 4 or 5 years. From the state's grant, which is payable to the Social Security Fund, as set out in law under the Section 9A of the 1974 Social Security law. And that was based on the fact that the Social Security Fund is in such a healthy position. So 2.4 billion as it stands, and growing. And the reason why this money was withheld was to actually plug the overspending gap by the government. If the fund is so healthy, then why can't this funding be found to provide for carers? Allowance determined by the government actuary. Has that question actually been asked of the government actuary to look at it? I would support this proposition, but before we need to determine what allowance we do need, and to have a proper analysis of the numbers so the actuaries know the facts involved to make correct calculations. Yes, sir, it won't be cheap, but the amount will cost so much less compared to the burden if the care fell onto our health service. I dread to think how much it would cost. Our dear unpaid voluntary carers do a fantastic job in looking after their loved ones, which if they decline, there would be an enormous pressure on the health service, which is struggling to cope with long-term care already. Plus, we wouldn't have enough care facilities to cope with any significant rise in numbers of people going into care. We should be saying a massive thank you to our carers for what they do, plus therefore we need to provide an allowance in recognition of that dedication, sir. I would hope that members, I thank them for listening, and I hope that they would support this proposition. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Deputy. Deputy Scott.
Thank you, sir. I very much, at first sight, I saw this proposition as being very attractive, and I think points are well made about people caring when they get to a certain age, and why should they not be paid to do that if, in fact, they otherwise would go to a care home and a lot more would be paid. I think that my difficulty has been that you could extend this to other areas, and that we wouldn't be even taking a consistent approach. So my comparison is with the fact that we're actually paying money towards nursery fees. Now, I think there's an argument that if you've got a stay-at-home mother, maybe you should pay them. And I think the argument why we pay the nursery fees, even though that could be more, and of course mothers are giving care and that sort of thing, is because it's done in a regulated way. So I haven't squared these two things, because I was thinking, well, if it's fair to support this proposition, then where do I stand on the other point about, you know, people who are caring for the young, and what we're doing there? So, I think that would involve a lot more money, and indeed, I know also the Minister has mentioned other kind of things that wouldn't be covered. So we come back to, and I don't enjoy the concept of income support as being the most efficient, practical way of supporting people. It comes up time and time again, and I wish we had an economy that meant that, you know, that everybody could get more out, but of course pensioners, stay-at-home mothers can't even participate in the kind of working place. So that's my reluctance to support the proposition.
Thank you, Deputy. Minister for Treasury and Resources.
Thank you, sir. Sir, I will not be supporting this proposal, and I would like to set out clearly why. First, the Minister for Social Security has already undertaken a detailed review of the support available for unpaid informal carers and for people with care needs. That work has not only been completed, but has already resulted in practical improvements to the way long-term care support is delivered. Secondly, the report setting out that review and its associated improvements was published at the end of January. Members now have a clear, up-to-date picture of the system, the challenges, and the changes that are being taken forward. It is, therefore, simply too early to conclude that an additional policy intervention of the scale proposed today is necessary. Thirdly, we have now begun a significant review of both the Social Security Fund and the Social Security Reserve Fund, prompted by the well-known and well-understood demographic pressures facing our island. This will give the next government the evidence and the framework needed to plan responsibly for the long-term sustainability of these funds, and that work must come first. In that context, it would be premature to introduce significant new entitlements or financial commitments before the structural review is complete. We should not make major policy changes in isolation from the wider financial picture. Doing so risks locking the island into costs that may not be affordable or sustainable. The potential cost of what is being proposed today could run into tens of millions of pounds every year. That is not a small adjustment, it's a major recurring financial obligation which may not be affordable in the long term. And we do have to think about the long term beyond the next 20 years. It's precisely the kind of decision that should only be taken once the full review of our social security finances is complete and we understand the long-term implications. Sir, we all recognise and support and appreciate the care that family members give to their loved ones. I've also met carers, and very few of them have asked to be paid. They don't expect to be paid to support their relatives. They want support, they want us to recognise the job they do, and they want some respite. And the Minister has done a lot with the long-term care system to ensure that happens. So there continues to be some very unhelpful statements, and I'd say misunderstanding, about the position of home carers allowance and pensioners. It only affects pensioners who are carers and who receive home carers allowance before they retire. Home carers allowance is a working age benefit that is normally only paid to people who are of working age, who have to give up work or give up the significant proportion of their work to provide care. When those people reach retirement age, they uniquely, I believe, are allowed to make a choice between continuing to receive home carers allowance, which would otherwise cease, or their pension if home carers allowance would put them in a better financial position than their pension. Nobody is denied their pension. They are allowed to take a better benefit if that is in their financial interest to do so. That is a fundamental point that I really have to emphasise. I'm sure the Minister will return to that as well, because I think it bears repeating over and over again to try and get people to accept and understand it. Overlapping benefits is also a long-standing, very long-standing feature of our social security legislation. If we simply wipe it out of the way here, then other people will come forward and say, well, I too should be able to get two benefits. Why should pensioners be able to get two benefits when other younger people can't? It creates numerous issues, and this cannot be done in isolation. And the final point I would ask is this: if somebody needs care, who is the best placed person to provide that care? Let me give you an example. A couple in their 80s, they're fit and healthy, they're managing quite nicely, and then one of them, let's just say the husband, who's 85, has a major health issue and returns from hospital needing care. His wife, who is 83, may be very keen to provide as much care as she can, but is she, realistically, she may have health issues of her own, is she the best placed person to provide care? And if we are going to start, and I know this sounds very unempathic, that the 85-year-old is very likely to benefit. He will then be able to get long-term care if his care needs are such. But if we are really going to start paying people to care, we need to start thinking about whether they are fit to care. And elderly people may simply not be fit to care, and we may have people trying to provide care for the sake of getting allowance when they're simply not able to do it. And we need to think of that. And I can see Deputy Ward scowling at me, but that is a fact. There will be pensioners may not be the best person to deal with a young adult. They may not be the best person to deal with another elderly pensioner. And that is where long-term care comes into its own, and other forms of support should be available. So, sir, we must be responsible in making these decisions. We must be evidence-led, and we must ensure that the support we provide is sustainable, not just for today's islanders, but for the future generations who will also face these challenges in 30, 40 years' time. So, sir, for those reasons, I cannot support those proposals, and I urge members to reject it. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Deputy Wall.
Thank you, sir. It just strikes me this is such a straightforward proposition. So I don't understand why both the Social Security Minister and the Treasury Minister have made it sound so complicated. I get a sense that they protest us too much. This proposition is about fairness, evidence, and responsibility. Today, older islanders who continue caring for loved ones with high-level needs are forced to choose between the state pension and the home carers allowance, a rule that ends financial recognition of caring the moment someone turns 67. That is not only unfair, it ignores the reality that caring does not stop at retirement age. This proposition does not commit Jersey to immediate spending. It simply demands the data, the analysis, and only if sustainable, the inclusion of funding in the next government plan. In short, let's get the facts, assess affordability, protect older carers. That is what P27 is asking for, and that's why I'll be supporting it. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy. Deputy Taddeo.
Thank you, sir. I'm not sure it is that straightforward, because I think what we would effectively be asking for is for the Minister to set a whole train of work for something that they don't want to do, or that they may not want to do, and that's not good policy making. I think the logical way to do things is decide what the policy should be, establish whether there needs to be a policy change, and there may well be, and then I think take it from there. So I'm still, I probably shouldn't admit this to my party colleagues, I've got some, I've still got some sympathy for this proposition, and I haven't fully made up my mind if I will accept some parts of it. But let me talk members through my thinking, because Deputy Andrews is quite correct that I think it was at the beginning of 2025, and it must have just been before the ministerial changeover. I did ask the former Social Security Minister, and we're quite lucky in this Assembly. We've got a current Social Security Minister, and we have two members who have been Social Security Minister, one of whom has just spoken in her capacity as Treasury Minister, and we may yet hear from from Deputy Gorst. And I did say, indeed, that there are members of the public out there who do believe that a carer's allowance should be paid even when you are a pensioner in receipt of a Social Security pension. And I mentioned that I had a constituent who hadn't left the island for 7 years, and I said I don't think I can imagine quite a thing for me to have not left for 7 years. And she said quite simply, I think that home care's allowance should continue when you receive your pension, and as nothing has changed. And I did ask the Minister at the time, because this was just before the review was published, I think, about whether she'd keep an open mind during the course of her review. And she said, I am open-minded, but I think we have to remember that it's not just about home carers' allowance. The Social Security Fund has developed over decades to pay people one set of contributions and receive one benefit. And I think maybe here we're asking the wrong questions, because I think that I don't think it's a zero-sum game, and I don't think it's black and white. So I was partly nodding along when the Treasury Minister talked about the fact that you often have a scenario where you have two elderly people, one of whom is looking after the other, but in reality, we know that actually they could probably both do with a carer in some ways, or that you've got somebody who has got their own health challenges and they're stepping up, if you like, to look after that other person. And it may only be a case of months, or it could take an unfortunate health crisis for that other person to be struck down. And I've seen that happen, actually, where that person can no longer continue, and both will need care, sometimes one in a home setting and the other in a care setting. And I think it's also more complicated anyway, because you can't legislate for familial situations. There will be cases where actually it's quite right that a family member who may be a younger member and is at home or works from home and can be more flexible in their working approach can look after that person, especially if it's non-high-level nursing care, if it's simply often routine things. I think of my own mother, if it's something simply like washing the feet, cutting toenails, that's something which you may be very comfortable doing for a family member, or having done to you by a family member. But if it's something else that requires more intervention, then I think that's where it becomes more complicated. So I do take on board sometimes the advice we may wish to give to our constituents is that actually the earlier that you can set somebody on the path of the long-term care scheme, the better, because of course we know that it's capped anyway. And so if they can start using the long-term care scheme and they reach the cap much quicker. And it's actually the case that lots of people are in receipt of things that they could put down as long-term care, but actually it's not until much later, when the care becomes a much higher level that they start to record those costs. So I think we do need to have an awareness campaign. But similarly, it's not just about financial considerations when people are in these situations. That's not what's at the forefront of their mind. I also don't think it's necessarily right, although it might be technically correct. Most people in the community who spend years paying into a social security scheme, and remember, these people might not be claiming any other benefits during the entirety of their lives. They see that as their personal pension scheme. It doesn't work like that. We know it's a contributory one which is wider. We also know that if you die before you reach retirement age, sir, you don't get to claim your pension and you can't pass that pension on to somebody else. Is that right? I don't know. It's not necessarily correct, but a workplace pension would certainly work in a different way. Even though the workplace pension, you could argue, is not always necessarily your own pension pot. It may be, it may not be, depending on how that scheme works. So I think there is that issue there that actually it's fair enough to say that you can't claim more than one benefit, but you can claim more than one benefit at different times during your working life. So you might claim short-term incapacity, you might claim long-term incapacity. And it seems strange that somebody might only become a carer after they retire, and they've actually been paying in all their lives, but they've never taken any other form of benefit, and that they can't claim that. So I think these are the arguments that are in play here. As I've said, I don't think it's a zero-sum game, and there is a question about if somebody is a carer, should they be able to claim an allowance for being a carer? Is it discriminatory on an age basis to say that retired people, i.e. you're over a certain age, you can't claim a certain benefit which a younger person might claim? Also, that younger person may have only worked for 6 months of their life, at which point they're able to claim the allowance, where somebody who's worked arguably 40 years of their life and has never claimed that, then retires, can't claim any of that benefit. So I think, again, there are serious questions to be asked here. Ultimately, though, I do accept what the Social Security Minister is saying here, that I think she agrees that there is an issue to be looked at, and I think that the future Social Security Minister will also take that on board, sir, and that this is perhaps not necessarily the right question or the right solution to what the problem is. But I do certainly thank Deputy Andrews for bringing this forward and for, again, raising this issue and also sticking to his election pledges. I think that's important that members in this Assembly do that, sir.
Thank you, Deputy. Does anyone else wish to speak on this proposition? Deputy Catherine Curtis.
Thank you, sir. I'd like to thank Deputy Andrews as well for bringing this to the Assembly now. I acknowledge the fantastic work being done by unpaid carers, and I did visit the householder who has been campaigning for the right to draw a pension and home carers allowance, and that was back in 2024. So this was during the previous government, and then I, with Deputy Barbara Ward, had some meetings with the then Social Security Minister and officers. And I understood that Deputy Andrews was also very concerned about this matter at the time. When speaking to the then Social Security Minister, the understanding was that a new allowance was being created around care needs at home, and this extra support was added to the current benefit system. However, it seems that there are still many people who feel that it's not fair that they cannot have their pension at the same time as home carers allowance. And I do understand that. But when it comes to costs of around £75 million, I don't think we can do this off the back of a backbencher proposition. The costs imposed on the working population would be huge. The previous and the current Social Security Ministers have both, to my mind, been working away to improve things for carers, and I think this is the best way forward. I think this is a matter for government to work on, which will include ways to support those who need it most. It may be that those particular carers who are finding it hard to manage can be helped in better, more targeted ways. I do think this is a better way to progress things rather than starting the big piece of work that is proposed in this proposition.
Thank you, Deputy. Does anyone else wish to speak on this proposition? Deputy Gorst.
Thank you, sir. Deputy Tadier suggested he thought maybe I, as a former Social Security Minister, should say something. He seemed to me, sir, that he was doing a rather good pitch for a position as future Social Security Minister. Well, I'm not sure that Social Security. Anyway, let's maybe he is. Somebody's from the sidelines is saying perhaps it was a pitch for External Relations Minister, and maybe it was. So this is a difficult issue, and on the surface, the point that Deputy War made was it seems simple. Why can't somebody have two benefits out of the Social Security Fund? And yet he knows, sir, because he's an employer, he knows that he as an employer and his employees are only paying one contribution into the fund. And that one contribution determines ultimately the level of pension that contributors get out of the fund. What this proposition on its face is calling for is for two benefits to be paid even though there's only one contribution. And that is the basic issue that the Social Security Minister rightly has to deal with. And I think other members have said that she, succeeding her predecessor, have sought to try, I'm happy to be interrupted, have sought to try to provide improved benefits for carers. And I think they've made good progress there. But coming back to Deputy Tadier's point, the way that informal caring is taking place, it isn't just those who've got carers allowance, those who then become pensioners. It's happening right across our community, and it is a really positive thing. Some people are getting paid for it through the benefits system. Some are getting paid for it through the social security system, but many, many others are not. They're just doing it informally. And I think the point for me is that as our society ages, and we all in this room are aging, none of us knows at what point we're going to need support with our care, that this is an area that will need to be constantly under review, because the way that care is taking place in our community is changing, and that won't stop. It will continue to change because that informal care can be 24/7, but it can also just be an hour in the evening supporting a neighbour with the preparation of an evening meal, or making sure that they're out of bed in the morning. So care is changing, and I don't think that we should, with the greatest of respect to Deputy Andrews, simply accept this is going to be the answer going forward, because I think it's going to be much more complex and much more nuanced, and rather, I know that the desire of the current Social Security Minister is always to act fairly with those who, metaphorically, knock on her door. And that's been a long tradition of Social Security ministers. And therefore, I think the right thing is for the incoming government to think about caring in the round, rather than just make what would be quite a hasty decision to say we're going to say that two benefits can be paid even though there's only been one contribution. Because it doesn't take a mathematician or a statistician to recognise that one payment in cannot ever produce two payments out. More payments would be required to go in. And that, other than drawing down the Social Security Reserve Fund. That is a decision which shouldn't be made off the back, with the greatest of respect, of a backbencher proposition, sir. And that's for the reason, I know it's complicated, and I know that the proposer has got the best intentions at heart, but this is such an important cornerstone of how we will provide for the ageing demographic in our community that we need to do it carefully and with all the evidence in front of us. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Deputy. Deputy Barbara Ward, have you got a point of clarification?
Yes, sir.
Do you give way to a point of clarification?
Of course I do, sir.
Yes, Deputy Barbara Ward.
Thank you very much, Deputy. You say that we pay one contribution in, that is under our social security contributions, but we have been told in this chamber that what we pay in is not just for your old age pension. It covers many benefits. So we may be paying one contribution into the scheme, but it actually is there to provide a number of benefits, one being our old age pension, one being income support or whatever.
And your question for the...
No, I think I've got the
You've got the
clarification requested.
So could you explain, please, sir?
Thank you, Deputy Barbara Ward. Yes, Deputy Gorst.
And that the request for clarification perfectly illustrates why this should be done with the appropriate information, and the Minister should be allowed to do it because, of course, as we know, income support's got nothing to do with the contributory benefit system. Income support is provided from the taxpayer system and is means tested from the taxpayer. That's a contract between low-income families and taxpayers and is unconnected completely with the Social Security Fund. I'm very much, if the Minister would like to ask for further clarification, I'm quite happy if I've got it wrong, but anyway, we'll deal with that. That's income support, so that's not in any way, shape or form two benefits coming out of one contribution. It's unconnected. The Deputy does raise an issue, which is an important issue, about long-term and short-term incapacity benefits. The contribution that we pay into the Social Security Fund also helps to provide those benefits. And it's built in to the overall contribution that we currently pay. And therefore, if we are going to add an additional double benefit, it would have to be and should be built into the contribution system. It isn't currently, and therefore it's not straightforward to say you can add a double benefit without the contribution going in. Otherwise, we would reduce the value of the Social Security Reserve Fund, and this Assembly would not be in a position to be able to manage that fund to deal with the challenges that we face into the future. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Does anyone else speak on this proposition? Deputy Mezek.
Thank you, sir. It's been a long week so far, but the debates have got no less interesting, and the contributions have certainly got no less thoughtful as we've gone along. There's been some good contributions in this, and I've enjoyed listening to those, and I've been trying to collect my own thoughts as we've gone along, because these debates can be framed in such a way that can make them very, very difficult, because at the heart of what this is about is us as an island and as a government recognising the role of carers in our society and doing what we can to support them to the best of our ability. And you would hope that nobody in their right mind would want to say no to genuine good opportunities to enhance that. And if you were to ask anybody the question, do you think pensioners who are also carers should get more support? Well, you know, of course, who's going to say no to that? I'm sure we all instinctively feel that way and would want to see that happen. But what matters for a government is the question of how you do that and whether you do that in the most effective way possible to ensure that people aren't left behind or people don't slip through the cracks because of arbitrary rules that don't necessarily cover everything appropriately. And unfortunately, that's why this proposition is problematic, because it starts by making an assumption that the overlapping benefits rule causes a gap, and that's obviously highly contestable. And then it makes the subsequent conclusion that the way to fix that gap is to make this particular rule change. And that, of course, is also highly contestable, because there is an effect that would be caused by changing the overlapping benefit rule. And there are things that we know for sure as to what would happen if that were to occur. We know, sir, that pensioners who are carers already on income support would likely not be better off at all by this, because income support is a means-tested benefit and the home carers allowance is not. And so there would be deductions from income support to correlate with the extra income from home carers allowance. So those people not made better off at all by that decision. It's also the case, sir, that if the information I found online was correct and up to date, that the home carers allowance is just shy of £300 a week. So let's say we change the rule and we open that up to some people. Why is £300 a week the magic number, the exact correct number that will solve problems for people? There'll be some households where that won't be enough, and there may be some households where that's more than sufficient. What if there are those households for whom it's not actually about the money at all, it's about the other forms of support that come, and the Minister and others mentioned respite support, that obviously being a fundamental part of it. And so, sir, I think that, going on a slight tangent here, I think it would be really good for as many of us as possible to read the report that the Social Security Minister published. I thought that really helped me understand the system better and understand its difficulties and how things might be improved in it. But more widely than that, I think it's really important that Jersey takes stock of the welfare system we have as a whole, how we got it, how it came into existence, and how the particulars within it operate. Because if you have a good understanding of that, you can come up with more constructive solutions on how to fix it. When I first became a States member, I would often get constituents coming to me to complain about Social Security, and I didn't know a huge amount about the system at the time, and I would obviously hear them out and attempt to help them. And I didn't have the depth of understanding in those days that when members of the public refer to Social Security, they're often actually referring to stuff that is not Social Security benefits, that it's other elements of the benefits system. And those other elements have come into being at different stages in our history, operate under different rules and serve different purposes. That the Social Security benefits as a contributory benefit that will pay out a single benefit to you at any given time when you qualify for it is done on a non-means-tested basis and is done there to provide a basic safety net for everyone by right, because they've paid into it. And on top of that would be what else you might need to get by, whether that was benefits from another part of the welfare system or perhaps your own independent income, etc. But you can be a multi-millionaire who paid your Social Security contributions and you still get your state pension when you retire. It's not means tested, it's your entitlement to that is through right, and so you still get it. Whereas the income support system is funded through taxation, it is not contributory and is means tested and will be adjusted in all sorts of different ways to take into account your particular household needs. And then, of course, there's long-term care on top of that as well. Simply changing one specific element of the Social Security benefits, the home carers allowance, acts as if the home carers allowance is the home carers allowance as opposed to a home carers allowance, when there are other elements of welfare support that exist to support carers. There's a component of the income support system, for example. And if you were going to pick one to tinker with, it probably would be the income support one, because that's the means-tested one. That's the one that interacts with other rules that are more tailored towards a particular household's needs, whereas the home carers allowance is just a blanket £300 a week, which may or may not be getting at what the issue might be for a particular household, that household being made up of people who care and people who are cared for. And of course, people who are cared for have their own rights and entitlements as well through the system, and it has to be holistic to work out that a family is getting everything that they deserve. So I think for that reason, the proposition, of course, should be rejected because it is not straightforward, as one deputy suggested previously. I'd be interested if he's actually read the report from the Social Security Minister that makes that abundantly clear, and instead allow the Minister to focus on what are focused and tailored changes to the various bits of the system, the different bits of support that exist in one part or another part, rather than targeting one which we already know from the outset would not make the worst off better. So that's clearly not a good use of our time and will offer, at the end of the day, false hope. And politics is at its worst when we offer people false hope. And that's why the proposals for change have to be underpinned by evidence and an understanding of how the system actually works. And on this occasion, though, that proposition is clearly well-meaning and it appeals to something that I hope we all feel inside ourselves, which is that we want the best for carers and those who are cared for in Jersey. The proposition won't actually take us forward, in which case it's expending energy, offering false hope and not really taking us forward, and that's not what we ought to be doing.
Thank you, Deputy. Does anyone else wish to speak on this proposition? I call upon Deputy Andrews to reply. Deputy Andrews.
Thank you, sir. I must thank everybody who has taken part in this debate. I just wanted to begin by explaining the reason why I decided to go with the Social Security Reserve Fund, because I know there's been a couple of colleagues who've mentioned and questioned the use of why I put that in the proposition. And the reason being is because I knew if we were to introduce a change and it was only going to be using the Social Security Fund, that we could then be introducing a structural deficit. And so the investment income could potentially be used to supplement the Social Security Fund, much like the state's grant is used to supplement the Social Security Fund to increase the level of expenditure, whilst also using the investment income but also preserving the capital in the reserve as well. Obviously, that's something that you don't want to ease into. And that was the reason why I decided to bring forward this proposition where an exercise, that is a modelling exercise, could be undertaken, firstly to ascertain the number of people who could be entitled to receive the home carers allowance, and then secondly, it would be about, well, how do we then develop policy? I know, for instance, there would be a couple of options, and I know somebody who mentioned this online about, for instance, a partial HCA payment instead of it being made payable in full. And again, that would have been something that I would have been very much open to. But I think, again, you need to be basing decisions by using evidence. And I think it's a shame that, several colleagues feel that this proposition cannot be supported, because I think it does provide the Assembly with an opportunity to be a bit more creative, to be a bit more expansive, and to also appreciate the work that carers do. And I just wanted to also highlight what Deputy Barbara Ward mentioned in the debate when Deputy Gorst spoke. Obviously, people who provide their social security contributions, they potentially may be entitled, for instance, if they are on sickness benefit for a time before they then recommence work, but also later in life as well, they potentially can claim their pension if they do get to that age. And I think that the last point that I really wanted to emphasise here is the unfairness of the rule, where individuals are placed in such an invidious position, coming to retirement age and having to decide whether they take up the home carers allowance or the state pension. I mean, for me, if you've worked all your life, you are entitled to receive your state pension. But I also understand why several pensioners have decided to take up the home carers allowance because they receive more income. And even just looking at the rate of income that those individuals receive, you can see why some pensioners are struggling, unfortunately, in our island. And I think for me, it's about also addressing inequality partly as well, and appreciating the care that those pensioners provide, and also rewarding them as well, giving them more income, more disposable income. Because at the end of the day, I think it's a high-cost jurisdiction. I think we're all very much aware of that, and I think the state has an opportunity here to try and make a difference, to try and improve people's lives, because there are many pensioners out there who are struggling. I know it's certainly the case in my constituency, but we've also got to remember and appreciate the extent that certain individuals will go to care for loved ones. And I just want to say a massive thank you to all of those pensioners who provide excellent care, and sometimes we don't really give them the appreciation that they deserve. So I just wanted to place that on record, and I must thank all my colleagues for taking part in the debate, and I thank you, sir, for giving me the opportunity to speak. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy. Is the appel called for? Thank you. The appel has been called for. Members are invited to return to their seats. I ask the greffier to open the voting. If all members have had the chance to cast their votes, I ask the greffier to close the voting. The proposition has been rejected. 8 votes pour, 31 votes contra, and 1 abstention. Yes.
Those members voting pour, the Conotab of St Saviour and Deputies Gardner, Moore, War, Barbara Ward, Andrews, and the Conotab of St Clement and Deputy Dublain. Deputy Wilson abstained.
The next item is political parties and election expenses, online publication of information, lodged by Deputy Scott. The member respondent is the chair of the Privileges and Procedures Committee. I ask the greffier to read the proposition.
The States are asked to decide whether they are of opinion to request the Privileges and Procedures Committee, in consultation with the Judicial Greffier and the Jersey Electoral Authority, to undertake the necessary legislative changes for debate before the next public election in 2030 to require the online publication of A, the register of political parties and the statements of accounts of all political parties, and B, declarations of donations of over £500 in value relating to any public election, whether received by individual candidates or by political parties, any such declarations to be made a prescribed period from receipt and before such public election.
Deputy Scott.
Thank you, sir. The purpose of this proposition is to increase the transparency of information regarding future electoral candidates. Owing to the timing of this proposition, it does not seek any needed legislative changes to the relevant laws before the public election in 3 months' time. It aims for them to be in place before the 2030 election, should the proposition be supported by this States Assembly and the next Assembly give its continued political support. Any candidate intending to stand on a platform of improving transparency in the next election, or who did in the last election, might be expected by voters to give this proposition their support, and maybe as a voter they might be interested in supporting it too. The proposition would enable voters to find out more about the rules of political parties and significant financing of election candidates by this information being posted online, and before they choose to vote for them in a public election. 2 laws are relevant here. The Political Parties Registration Jersey Law 2008, which requires political parties to disclose their constitutions and annual accounts, and the Public Elections Expenditure and Donations Jersey Law 2014, which currently requires disclosure of information regarding donations to political parties and individual candidates, albeit in different amounts and in different ways. So I thank the Privileges and Procedures Committee for their comments on my proposition and their support and members' support of paragraph A of my proposition. This is on the basis that providing information online should be pretty straightforward. Up to now, if a member of the public wished to take a look of a copy of the constitution and accounts of a registered party held by the Judicial Greffe, physical presence at the Judicial Greffe's office would be required, which would be limited to the opening hours of the Judicial Greffe. This obviously presents a difficulty with those with disabilities or whose working hours mirror those of the Judicial Greffe. So I welcome the PC's with support of this particular part of my proposition. Paragraph B of the proposition seeks to bring declarations of both independent and political party candidates in line, ensuring that substantial donations in excess of £500 are declared to the Jersey Electoral Authority in advance of an election for both individual candidates and independent candidates and political parties. So with respect to the PPC's stated position on paragraph B, it won't be the first time that I and perhaps some members of this Assembly find the PPC's position on this matter a little perplexing or baffling. This debate does provide the chair of the PPC with an opportunity to explain its reasons along the lines provided in its comments, but also to respond to the position of response that I emailed to States members over last weekend. In that email, I pointed out the PPC's comments only address a duty of political parties and existing members to declare certain donations before the election. The PPC's comments miss a point regarding the time period within which political parties are required to declare donations in excess of £500 received before an election within 4 weeks of receiving the sum. If it is received less than 4 weeks before a public election, it is not required to be declared until after the election. The PPC's comments also refers to Standing Order 152, which requires members to declare sponsorship money received to support their electoral campaign. But the Standing Order, which does not set a minimum amount, allows 30 days to declare the donation. So again, if the amount is received less than 30 days before an election, there is no obligation to disclose it before the election. Furthermore, the PPC's comments do not redress the position for candidates who aren't existing members. There is no requirement for them to declare significant sponsorship before the election at all. So why wouldn't the PPC support a proposition that aims to help voters to find out more about the rules of political parties and the financing of election candidates before casting votes in a public election, particularly when the proposition contemplates that the work would largely be developed by the next PPC, particularly when a number of its members may have stood on platforms advocating transparency in the next election? And why would members seek political groups to be more transparent than themselves? So I have my own answer to suggest there, but I'll reserve disclosing it until my closing speech, after the chair of the PPC has had the opportunity to speak to these questions himself. In the meantime, I invite members to support the service to voters in this island that this proposition aims to achieve. If voter disengagement is informed by an attitude that voters do not know what they are voting for, why allow information to be hidden away from them? So I commend this proposition to the States members and request their support.
Thank you, Deputy. Is the proposition seconded? Yes, sir. Thank you. Does anyone wish to speak on the proposition? No one wants to speak on the proposition? In that case, Deputy Mozak.
Thank you, sir. I want to just very, very briefly speak in support of Part A of this proposition. As the longest standing political party in Jersey. We've had to abide by the political party's registration law. That puts obligations on us in terms of what we have to declare and where we register that. We're all absolutely comfortable with that. If I may make one comment, I have to say that I kind of think the political parties register would be better off being sat with the state's greffier rather than the judicial greffier, but that's not the biggest issue in the world. I think it would make more sense though, because the states is governing political matters on a day-to-day basis as opposed to the courts, but we didn't think it was worth pursuing that as a last-minute amendment to this proposition. But putting the documents that we have to file into the register online makes absolute perfect sense. We're happy to do so. And if I might brag for just a moment, sir, that when we recently approved our most recent financial statements, we did proactively send those to all of the media for their inspection so that they could look at them and scrutinise them and see if anything was interesting in them. They obviously concluded there wasn't, because there was no coverage as a result of it, but we're happy to do that, and we're happy to set the standards, and we're also happy to express our concerns at the involvement of others in politics who seem to be prepared to do everything they can to avoid having to abide by that level of transparency, including claiming to be local movements but using UK structures, which is not how we ought to be doing things here in Jersey. That's a standard that we support, wish to see delivered in Jersey, and so we're very happy to vote for Part A on that basis.
Thank you, Deputy. Does anyone else wish to speak on this proposition? If no one else wishes to speak, then I'll call upon the Deputy to reply. Deputy Scott.
Sir, I thank Deputy Mesick for his comments. I happen to have originally agreed that it made more sense for the state's greffier to act as the registrar, and originally did put that in the proposition and just thought it's too complicated. The judicial registrar has traditionally, the judicial gref has traditionally acted as the registrar for other things like intellectual property. There are arguments why it should not be acting as registrar, but in the time available, I thought it was best just to consult. I note that the Deputy didn't actually give reasons for not supporting paragraph B, which which just requires that candidates in the election disclose sums of £500 or more that are given that are actually being used to support their campaign before the election, so that voters do know who's funding them. It's quite simple. I remember when I was standing, a fellow deputy was actually had quite a strong position about anybody who was wealthy standing, and I think it's worth knowing, are people funding themselves from their own resources or from somebody else's? Simple as that. So this is simply about giving voters that information when you're standing in election and by reporting those amounts. So I have been asked, and I think it's, if I'm going to take this vote in blocks, I will. We'll just put the proposition forward, Part A first and then Part B, accordingly. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Deputy. So the first vote is on Part A of the proposition relating to the online publication of the Register of Political Parties and a statement of accounts of all political parties. And I invite the greffier to open the voting. If all members have the chance to cast their votes, then I ask the greffier to close the voting. Part A has been adopted unanimously, 38 votes for. Now move on to Part B declarations of donations of over £500. I ask the greffier to open the voting. All members have the opportunity to cast their votes. I ask the greffier to close the voting. Part B has been rejected, 15 votes for, 23 votes contrary. Yes.
Those members voting pour, the Connétable of St Brelard, St Peter, St Martin, St John, Grouville, St Saviour and St Clement, and deputies Gardner, Farnham, War, Miles, Scott, Tombinet, Wilson and Dublé, and those members voting contre, the Connétable of St Lawrence, and deputies Southern, Tadia, Luce, Lehigara, Ayer, Bob Ward, Alves, Gorst, Mezek, Balash, Coles, Renouf, Catherine Curtis, Feltham, Rose Binet, Jean, Miller, Howe, Ferry, Alex Curtis, Barbara Ward and Stevenson.
The next item is assessment of visual impact in green backdrop zone planning applications lodged by Deputy Scott. The main respondent is the Minister for the Environment. Deputy Scott, you have lodged an amendment. Do you wish your proposition to be proposed as amended?
Yes, please, sir.
If there's no objection, then it will be read as amended. I ask the greffier to read the proposition as amended.
The states are asked to decide whether they are of opinion to request the Minister for the Environment to A, take the necessary steps to ensure that all planning applications for sites within the Green Backdrop Zone, GBZ, are likely to have visible impact on the GBZ, include both a text and pictorial assessment of the visual impact of the application on features requiring protection and enhancement in accordance with policy GD9, Skyline Views and Vistas in the Bridging Island Plan 2022 to 2025. B, publish draft guidance no later than the end of 2026 to support the application of policy GD9 as set out in A, including pictorial identification of those features requiring protection and enhancement as set out in A, and C, provide additional resources to support the application of policy GD9, including maps of the GBZ that include sight lines from each viewing location that takes in features identified in B, and photographs illustrating those sight lines.
Deputy Scott.
Thank you again, sir. So they say that beauty is in the eye of the beholder, and we want to protect the beauty of this island, but how can we when beauty is so subjective? When we still need development to create homes for islanders. The focus of this proposition is on the relatively low-density residential areas of escarpment in the east, south and west of the island that provide a backdrop, green backdrop and setting to much of St Helier, St Oban, Gorey, St Brelard's Bay and Waynay Bay. Thanks to the efforts of the Constable of St Brelard in the debate of last island plan, in the case of Waynay. They are particularly visible from the coast and the sea. The report accompanying this proposition shows their precise location. Owing to their low-density residential development, they are not offered the highest level of landscape protection in the Bridging Island Plan 2025 to 2022 to 2025 that is offered to other parts of the coast, designated as protected coastal area or coastal national parks such as St One's Bay, Beauport Bay and coastal area in St Martin. Instead, they are designated as green backdrop zones, GBZ. Policy GD8 of the Bridging Island Plan sets out a presumption that the density of development in those areas will be increased, while also setting out relatively vague rules that seek to protect their landscape values. This obviously creates a tension, sir. Despite past efforts to improve the policy, successive island plans have noted these areas have been subject to overdevelopment or insensitive development. Trees are felled to create sea views for new homes of wealthy residents of them. And in some cases, they've not been replaced with sufficient planting, even of shrubs, to compensate for the degradation of this green backdrop. The difficulty boils down to this. If landscape plans are submitted by developers, what are they supposed to do exactly? What part of the landscape is development expected to preserve? And what can it take away without excessively spoiling some of the island's treasured beauty spots? Some former ministers for the environment have been alert to this problem. For others, it has not been a priority. The 2020 Jersey Integrated Landscape and Seascape Assessment, commissioned by Deputy John Young of my parish when he was Minister for the Environment, has provided some guidance on how planning applications with an impact on scenic areas should be assessed. I will refer to that document in the rest of the speech as the JILSA. The rules for assessing planning applications are set out in the validation requirements for planning applications and other applications. When referring to the JILSA, they only mention its relevance in the context of policies NE3 and GD9 and make no reference to policy GD8 that applies to green backdrop zones. Policy GD9 does have relevance to green backdrop zones because it seeks to protect and even to enhance skylines, views and vistas against adverse impacts. At this point, we have two problems. Firstly, as mentioned, the JILSA, it does not cover all green backdrop zones. And as I've mentioned, part of that reason is that the Constable St Brelard brought within the scope of green backdrop zones, Waynay Bay. It was not designated a green backdrop zone at the time the guidance was prepared. Secondly, it still is not entirely clear how the impact of development in these areas is to be assessed. The Planning Department now, thanks to the efforts of previous planning ministers of the environment, has a landscape officer who is involved in assessing applications, but the method by which he does so remains relatively opaque. The further work that needs to be done is relatively simple, but it would have significant impact in assisting those who wish to develop sites in the green backdrop zone and those who wish to ensure that the development is not insensitive to their landscape values. Modern technology makes it relatively simple to compare visual representations of areas before and after development. It starts with a camera. Paragraph A of this proposition seeks the changes needed to be made to the validation requirements to ensure that such comparisons are produced when they are likely to have a visible impact on the green backdrop zone. Even then, it remains unclear what we are trying to protect unless we identify exactly what it is. The new paragraph B seeks this guidance, which is particularly important for areas like Waynay, of which there are no pictorial representations provided in JILSA at all. For me, that would be views from publicly accessible areas like the water's edge in the centre of the relevant bays, or from viewpoints on cliff paths above them. I invite any States member to just think of an iconic view of an area like St Brelard's Bay and to actually imagine where they would be standing and what they would be seeing. I would not expect every viewpoint to be identified, but surely the key ones should be. Islanders should have an opportunity to agree what the iconic views we wish to protect and enhance are, at least some basic ones, so that planning officers and developers can then discuss how. I thank the Minister for Environment for accepting Part A of this proposition, and my understanding is that he is going to accept paragraph B. Paragraph C of my proposition exists because if a planning officer takes a photo of a view from a specific place, saying this is what I am trying to protect, it would help developers to know from what point that picture was taken, described in this part of the proposition of the sightlines. And quite simply, sir, if I'm standing on the Portland Common and I'm looking at a view, I must be looking at in a certain direction. It helps to say, where am I standing and in what direction am I looking? And that will actually identify my sightline when I'm explaining where does this picture, where's it actually come from? How did I make it? So it would help developers. So if a planning officer takes a photo of a view from a specific place, it would help developers to know from what point that picture was taken and described in this part of the proposition as the sightlines. So this part of the proposition is about transparency. Yes, it may mean an element of survey, or maybe not, just a very basic description. But surely government has those resources within that enable these viewpoints to be identified precisely, allowing both planning officers and developers to use the same song sheet to produce agreed architectural and landscape harmony. So I would welcome the Minister of Environment's response to this matter, as his comments don't, he didn't manage to respond to my emails seeking information and cost quantification, or explain why the actual comments have gone into some detail about C, suggesting that what is required is very detailed. I'm not sure that the proposition need be interpreted that way. So in the meantime, I commend my proposition to the States Assembly to help produce clearer planning for the areas discussed, and I commend the proposition.
Thank you, Deputy. Is the proposition seconded? Thank you. Does anyone speak on the proposition? Minister.
Thank you, sir. Sir, this amended proposition now has three parts. I shall address part A first and then focus on parts B and C together. Turning to part A, it's important to begin by recognising that the need to assess the visual impact of development within the green backdrop zone is entirely accepted. That's precisely what the Island Plan policies GD8 and GD9, working in combination, are designed to achieve. Their purpose is to offer additional protection to the sensitive landscape character of the landscape escarpment that is contained within the defined built-up area and which forms a prominent green backdrop to St Helier, St Aubin, Gorey and St Bullard's Bay. But the key question, is how we achieve this sensibly and proportionately. Not every proposal within or affecting the green backdrop zone will have a material visual effect. Many routine or modest developments simply will not change the skyline, the character of the escarpment, or any meaningful view. What is needed is a pragmatic and proportionate approach. We can deliver this by reviewing and updating the existing validation checklist that sets out what applicants need to provide in support of their planning application. This checklist is managed by the planning application team and is currently the subject of review. The checklist can be revised to define clear, practical triggers that identify when a visual impact assessment is genuinely required. For example, where a proposal's height, its position on the escarpment, or its relation to key landscape features along the skyline indicates the potential for the proposed development to have a material visual impact. Revising the checklist in this way would provide professional planning officers with the tools to apply a rigorous case-by-case assessment of both the need for visual information and the quality of what is submitted. This includes an ability to require the submission of a pictorial assessment of the impact of the development. This is most commonly achieved by the preparation and submission of photo montages from key viewpoints of the site as an integral part of any planning application. Planning officers already operate in this way. Enhancing the checklist will provide more specific advice to applicants about the requirement to provide appropriate information in support of their application. This will enable planning officers to better assess the visual impact of proposals in the green backdrop zone where it is appropriate to do so. Where greater scrutiny is warranted, they can request it. Where it is not, unnecessary requirements can be avoided. This approach ensures that meaningful impacts are properly assessed, that policy GD8 and GD9 are applied robustly and consistently, and that applicants are not burdened with obligations that add little or no value, but which cost them time and money. In short, we can ensure the appropriate assessment of the visual impact of the development in the green blacktop zone, but only where it's likely to have one, by working with the tools that the planning applications team already have to require their preparation and submission where it is proportionate and justifiable to do so. Where visual impact assessments are submitted, they are already routinely published as an integral part of planning applications. So on the basis of the pragmatic and proportionate steps I've outlined, I'm content to support Part A of the Deputy's proposition. Turning to Parts B and C, the amended proposition asks the Minister to publish new supplementary planning guidance, complete with mapped sightlines, pictorial identification of landscape features, and catalogued viewpoints across the entirety of the green backdrop zone. On the surface, this might sound like a comprehensive and desirable outcome, but if we look more closely, does it really offer something that we actually need? We already have clear, robust supplementary planning guidance in place. In July 2023, the previous Minister for the Environment published the Landscape and Seascape Character Supplementary Planning Guidance that the proposer of this mentioned in her opening speech. This is based on the Jersey Integrated Landscape and Seascape Character Appraisal that the Deputy cites also. This provides structured advice on assessing the impact of development on views, key landmarks, skylines, and landscape character. It explains how we select appropriate viewpoints and how to consider skyline impacts. In other words, the framework to do what Deputy Scott is asking for is already there. Creating additional, highly prescriptive mapping enshrined in the new planning guidance would not only repeat much of this existing guidance, it would also date quickly. That's because views change, vegetation grows, routes shift, and the built environment evolves. Producing a static set of mapped sightlines and a catalogue of photograph views throughout and into the green backdrop zone might look thorough on paper, but would it remain accurate for very long? I'm not sure. Would it genuinely improve decision making on individual applications? I'm not sure about that either. It is also right that we consider the effort and resources that would be required to produce this proposed guidance. These would not be insignificant. Comprehensive GIS modelling, extensive field work and photography, drafting, consultation, and the necessary periodic updates would all be necessary to maintain accuracy. This at a time when professional resources are already committed to major pieces of work endorsed by this Assembly, including exploring the feasibility of a development levy, a revision and review of the residential parking standards, development of a framework for an ageing society, not to mention preparation for the next Island Plan review itself. Is it wise? Can we really afford it? Can we afford to divert limited professional capacity from those priorities? I think not. A more practical and reliable approach is to continue expecting developers to provide site-specific visual assessments that respond directly to the scale and context of each development proposal. This is consistent with how we assess other technical matters, such as the impact of development on heritage, ecology, and drainage. And planning officers already have full authority to challenge submissions, to request additional material, including photo montages from key viewpoints, and to ensure that policy GD9 is rigorously applied. So, whilst the intention behind Part B is understood, the proposed method is neither necessary nor proportionate in my view. The tools to assess visual impact already exist, and they already work within the existing level of resource that exists within the planning applications team. Creating a new layer of guidance would add considerable effort for limited practical benefit. Good planning isn't always about doing more, it's about doing what's necessary and doing it well. In this instance, we already have the planning guidance in place to do this, and the professional resources within the planning applications team to assess this aspect of development in the green backdrop zone where it is appropriate and necessary to do so. Sir, I would urge members to support my pragmatic and justified approach to this matter and to reject parts B and C of the Deputy's proposition. Thank you, sir.
So could I ask the last speaker to give
Prepared to give way to point of clarification, Deputy Scott? Yes.
Thank you. I just wondered if the Minister had details of the costs, if it's being supported by his department, of the local plan for Gorey Pier that's being developed.
I don't have that to myself personally at the moment, sir, no.
Is that something that the department is actually helping to fund?
So my understanding of the residential plan is the Deputy, can I ask her, sir, if she's talking about the plan that's being
Just a
developed?
point of clarification. Have you not dealt with this in your speech? I don't think. Have you at all?
Okay,
I don't think
I'm
it's
sorry,
a point of clarification. Does anyone else wish to speak on this proposition? Deputy Alex Curtis.
Thank you, sir. I'll endorse most of what the Minister said, although I feel in some ways his pragmatism is rather kind to accepting A. He made a very clear case that the existing validation checklist requires submission of information, and the minor tweaks are, as he says, minor. I'd like to highlight a couple of things from the perspective of somebody who sits with the planning committee and makes many of these decisions, which is there is a risk to Part B that is not just that of time and labour. Members will know, and especially those who helped draft it, the Island Plan, the Bridging Island Plan, has 96 policies in it. And whilst there's always challenge in assessing them, that is, as described in the plan, a place where conflicts and tensions do arise. It's the nature of a complex system. Part B not only talks only about the skyline zone, although we heard of listed settings and buildings, the importance of the setting of any building, whether it be into the natural environment, into the escarpments, or the listed environment, or any part of the built environment, is a material consideration for any decision maker. Importantly, where parts of the plan become too codified, there is a risk that you will see developers say, for example, the view of St Oban's Fort from one direction is considered. If that's codified in a document about a protected site, the omission of other views provides in some ways an implicit view to somebody to say, well, I'm not working within a protected sight line, so I've got less to worry about when it comes to proving this. It's far better, albeit it arises in natural tensions, for the policies to assess in the broad and consistent ways, as they already do and are worded, that it is for the decision maker to weigh up the relevant parts of them. We visited sites in the east of the island around Montorgueil, and the setting of Montorgueil is not defined by a box on a map. The setting is considered by the decision maker relative to the scale and size of the development and how it impacts that. And it's for professional planning officers to provide that advice in their recommendations, and for committee members to use their local and their long knowledge in assessing that. There's an infinite number of ways you can carve up the many facets of the Island Plan and its policies, and I would significantly warn that by, unless we have a change in policy that describes protected views, and I think that would be a new Island Plan policy, that actually trying to codify parts of this existing plan will bring more confusion when a developer comes forward, or an applicant comes forward with a scheme that falls outside of this, and the decision maker now has to justify that, notwithstanding them not falling into a protected area, the material considerations of that site, the setting, the massing, are material considerations that may lead to a negative determination. So I think if members are concerned that the balance of policy is not correct, that the built environment is being is taking on more than the natural environment that landscape character is inadequately assessed. It's on them to raise that. It's on the entire public to make sure they are keeping abreast of plans in their local and the island area. Their submissions are genuinely taken into account by the determining person, and they help form that. So if a lot of people talk about the importance of a view, that helps explain to the decision maker the importance of it. So it's incumbent on everyone, but codifying all of this to that extent will not help the decision maker. It is, as the Minister says, going to be unfeasible. And I would reiterate the way to solve the problem I believe the Deputy is going after is to continue to ensure that decision makers weigh the policies in a way that brings a balance that the island expects.
Thank you, Deputy.
Could
Deputy Scott.
have a point of clarification on that one, please?
Will you accept the
No, sir.
clarification? No. Deputy Renouf.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. And I would start by endorsing everything that the Minister has said and Deputy Curtis has said in terms of the balance of the arguments in relation to parts A, B and C. I do want to draw members' attention to one other factor though, because Deputy Scott's proposition does raise the question of visualisations and consistency of applications of information that's submitted in terms of visualisations. And it's not in relation to GD9. But more generally across the determination of planning applications. And this was brought to my attention in relation to the current Strive application and the issues around GD7, which are tall buildings. And there are no visualizations of the Strive building in the application that show it from a distance, certainly that I've been able to find. And I think that there is an absence of consistent application of standards around visualizations accompanying planning applications. And in two areas, I would say there is inconsistency in determining at what thresholds particular standards of visualization might be required. For example, sightings within distant views, what size of application would it be appropriate for those to be provided for the public? So those thresholds, I'm not aware of those existing. And I also think that the actual requirements, what kind of visualizations should be supplied with planning applications, is something that the department might want to look at, because again, referencing the Strive applications, what are presented are drawings, freehand drawings. The main visual representations of the setting of that building are presented as freehand drawings. You might call them cartoons, not computer-generated images, even though it is a job of minutes to spit out a computer-generated image of a building such as that. And so I do think that also in the context, not just in the context of thresholds, when should particular types of visualizations be produced, which policies should that apply to, but also what kind of visualization should be produced. Computer-generated, computer-real images or so on. I think it would be very, very helpful for the public in interpreting planning applications to have that issue, to have that addressed for future applications. And it would avoid some of the sort of debate that can happen around planning applications where these things can be disputed, and there's this inconsistency. Why wasn't this supplied when it wasn't? Why wasn't this supplied in one application when it was supplied in another? I think, for example, the hospital application was a good example of thorough and complete visualizations. And maybe that standard could be adopted more widely. So I draw attention to that because I think it is related. Had I been aware of the issues around the Strive application at an earlier point, I might have been tempted to bring an amendment to this proposition in order to stretch it beyond GD9. Potentially to GD7 and maybe elsewhere as well. But I think on balance, it is probably best left to the Minister and the Department to consider how they respond to that. But I do raise it as a serious issue because I do think that the public have a reasonable expectation that they would see standardised, relatively standardised visualisations of the potential impact of developments in situ from long views and short and the near environment, and that would be helpful. So I support the Minister's position on this, but I raise that as a adjacent issue.
Thank you, Deputy. Deputy Howell.
Thank you, sir. I'd just like to say that as a member of the Planning Committee, we do look at the green backdrop zone every time if it is applicable. I respect Deputy Scott for bringing this, but I just worry that we're overcomplicating things. I think for a large application like the hospital, it was really good to have all the views, and perhaps for Strive it would be good. But we have to just be mindful of people who are putting in planning applications, what we are asking them to do. And I think sometimes we're asking them to do too much. And I think sometimes we just have to say, hang on, let's not go any further. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Deputy. Does anyone else wish to speak on this proposition? I call upon Deputy Scott to reply. Deputy Scott.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for the different contributions. I think I need to just stress that currently and it was a question I was going to clarify with Deputy Curtis, whether he could, accept this, that the what's known as the validation requirements of VR do not refer to GD8. I challenge him to look at them and find them, unless they've been changed within the last couple of days, but they're just not in there. GD9 is. So I'm now hearing from members of the Planning Committee that, well, they do regard the setting of green backdrop zones. Well, what do we mean by the setting? There's built environment and there's landscape environment. And I do understand that the Planning Committee make many decisions based on their subjective judgment as to what is appropriate or not, and everybody else in the community is meant to accept that. But I don't see why there shouldn't be some more transparency about that, why there should not be a little bit more agreement about that, because it would help, as I have said, developers, and indeed as Deputy Rennick was saying, it helps the public in interpreting applications and really whether there's even, a basis of objection or not. So we talk about saving, not creating excessive red tape, but then what about the time spent by developers to whom it's not clear? What about the time spent by the public, just who don't understand? I think also we need to make it clear that the validation requirements aren't necessarily requirements that planning officers produce information. It can actually be that the developers do. Now, what we understand is that planning officers make their own assessments, but then you have to say on the basis of what? Now, paragraph A at least says, well, let's have these comparisons so that we can have some clarity about this. So I was confused when the Deputy was saying, even though the Minister supported A, that there was some sort of risk there. I am disappointed that the Minister perhaps couldn't give me a rough idea about the cost of identifying sight lines, and indeed, even with respect to B, not just simply understand that the purpose of B is to identify the information that A seeks to protect, which is features requiring protection and enhancement. Now, we're talking about features requiring protection and what are we protecting? Why should everybody go into this blind? Just some general idea about what is being protected. And I will actually, one of the questions I was going to ask Deputy Curtis, which again he didn't ask me to allow me to clarify, was will he accept that GILSA does not include Wayney? There's no picture of it. It's not included in all these views, you know, all this scenic stuff that the GILSA is trying to protect. I've looked. Maybe you haven't. Or he hasn't, sorry, sir. So B, I would say, is necessary in order to make some, to have some basic sense in terms of identifying. And it can be a simple photo of Waynay. I know that because Waynay has not been within the green backdrop zone for a while, some people might think things like the Russo estate aren't that attractive anymore and worth preserving, but that's the point. The green backdrop zone policy that now applies to it is meant to just say, well, what is it of this that we're still trying to preserve? So basically and this point about sightlines. Now, we're talking about the green backdrop. This is a policy that, unlike nearly every other policy in the island plan, is not land-centric. It actually requires you to stand somewhere where you can see, guess what, a green backdrop. So it's not really like, oh, go and stand on the green backdrop and have a look at St Albans Fort. You've got to stand somewhere that's open and where you can actually see a backdrop. So I would again submit that the actual points where you're looking at this vista that you want to identify for the purposes of GD9, which is actually the policy required in the validation requirements, it's got to basically be somewhere on a beach or on a headland, and that's publicly accessible. Now, when I actually look at these different green backdrop areas, to be honest, what we've got, about 4, 5? And how many points are we actually describing in each? 3? And that's actually as many as you might be talking about, 15 points, and you've got to actually identify what views you're protecting, and that will already have been partly covered by GILSA, and actually in what direction you were actually looking. So, Sir, I will take this proposition in block. I have attempted to explain why I think that it wouldn't cost as much and could be done out of department resources, because it involves a landscape officer who is making assessments to just simply say what she is doing when she assesses it. Where is she standing? Where is she looking? I don't believe that that's that complicated. For that reason, I would urge members to support all three propositions. It's the paragraphs. This is to do with scenic areas that actually do suffer much more by virtue of being subject to development than all those other scenic areas that are covered by green zone policies and coastal national park policy. They deserve a little bit more love and attention. Thank you, sir. And I'll take the proposition.
So, Deputy Scott, there are three sub-paragraphs, A, B and C. I think you accept that if B is rejected, then C falls away. Yes. So the first vote, members, will be on part A of the proposition.
Sir, Deputy Scott, I thought indicated she wasn't prepared to take them separately.
So she wants them taken separately, yes.
Question, sir? You're
happy for them to be taken separately, aren't you?
Well, I'd rather they weren't, but I believe somebody might.
Sorry, it's your decision. Sorry, I thought you wanted a separate votes on A, B and C.
I will take them separately, sir.
Yes. All right, so we're dealing first with part A of the proposition. Members are asked to return to their seats, and I invite the greffier to open the voting. If all members have the opportunity of casting their votes, I ask the greffier to close the voting. Announce that part A has been adopted. 28 votes for, 15 votes contra. Now move to part B of the proposition. And again, I ask the greffier to open the voting. All members of the casting their votes. I ask the greffier to close the voting. Part B has been rejected. 2 votes pour, 40 votes contra.
Those members voting for, Deputies Scott and Doublé.
Part 3 falls away. The next item is draft Elections Electoral Registers Amendment Commencement Act, lodged by the Privileges of the Procedures Committee. Chair of PPC, you've lodged an amendment to the Act, have you not?
Yes, sir.
Do you wish to have the matter considered as amended?
Yes, I would, sir. Thank you.
Members content to have the matter read as amended? Thank you. I ask the greffier to read the Act as amended.
Draft Elections Electoral Registers Amendment Jersey Commencement Act 2000. The states make this act under Article 27 of the Elections Electoral Registers Jersey Amendment Law 2025.
Yes. Chair of PPC.
Thank you, sir. This Commencement Act brings in the automatic voter registration system, replacing the current paper-based process with a database created from the People Directory. Instead of the public having to complete an annual statement to confirm the names of those who are eligible to be on the electoral register, people will be included automatically on the register if they are over 16 and meet the relevant residency criteria. The database comes from interactions with Revenue Jersey in relation to social security matters, the register of names and addresses, and information held by SIPES for those still in full-time education aged over 16. PPC believes this system will be more accurate than the existing system and will better reflect the position closest to the election date, taking account of changes such as people leaving the island or passing away. Members will recall that PPC brought an amendment to the law so that a candidates list will be provided to all candidates in an election once their nomination has been verified. Islanders will be able to check online to confirm that they are on the register using a special self-verification app which will be launched next week. If they are not registered, they can approach their parish to be added, if they can prove they have lived in Jersey for long enough. The electoral administrators, the parish secretaries, will still have power to add or remove a person from the register and retain overall responsibility for the register. The implementation is staggered. The first part comes into force on the 14th of March and ensures that notification letters will not need to be sent out to households this month, saving approximately £30,000. The second part has been delayed slightly to come into force on the 24th of March as per the amendment, so that final validation of the necessary data can be undertaken. As the end users of the system, it is vital that parish officials are confident that the system is robust. Sir, I make the proposition.
Thank you, Chair. Is the proposition seconded?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Does anyone wish to speak on the proposition? Conatapa St Brelard.
Thank you, sir. I'm grateful for the Chair of PPC amending the original proposition to change the date. Both the officers responsible for the electronic voting system and the parish officials have been working hard to try and get this right. And it's pretty close, it's fair to say that a couple of weeks ago we had 5,000 addresses with question marks Next to them now we're down to, I think, some 681. And I'm confident that in another week that'll be very much reduced. We're keen to get it tested, sir, and these few extra days will enable the parishes to do that in conjunction with the officials involved. So I'm grateful, sir, to the Chairman.
Deputy Miles.
Thank you, sir. I have a question for the Attorney General. I raised this issue at the original debate about electoral registers. Can the Attorney General advise whether there is any mechanism for a person to remove themselves from the list other than by cause of risk of serious harm? Thank you.
Attorney General.
Well, I'm grateful to the Deputy because she gave me advance notice that she was going to ask me, which is always a helpful thing, as this morning demonstrated. Members will recall debating this amendment law, and I'm just reading from the report to it. Members will know, as the chair of the PPC has just said, the new register of electors will be made up of data that already exists on registers elsewhere, amongst them the register of names and addresses. And the purpose behind the amendment was always that there would be no opt-out from that system. The report itself said, as the electorate will not be able to opt out of this system, it is only right that public access to the register is removed, thereby negating the requirement for a separate register to protect the anonymity of those at risk. In the new system, the register will only be available to electoral administrators and the judicial greffe, with a copy provided to the archive on an annual basis as an historic record. So the short answer to the Deputy's question is that there is no opt-out provision at the behest of the individual elector. If you are on the database, then you are on the electoral register. A person can make an application to be included on the register when by error they are not. This is what the amendments provide. The amendments provide that the electoral administrator in certain instances can remove a person from the electoral register, but there is no ability for the individual elector to apply to have their name removed. The other amendment that was made, and to which the Chair alluded earlier, is that where candidates are concerned, and not even they are given access to the underlying register, but they're provided with a candidates list of voters, which is prepared by the electoral administrator. And it is in that instance that members of the public are able to opt out of having their names appearing on the candidates list of voters. But that is as far as the opt-out under these amendments goes. I hope that's helpful.
Thank you, Attorney.
Sir,
yes.
I wonder if I may press the Attorney General, sir. In the past, sir, a copy of the voting list was held at the library. I take it that's going to be phased out, or has been?
I can't, that's not a question of law, I can't answer it.
Deputy Miles.
I thank the Attorney General for the answer to his question, and I'd just like to make a very quick speech, which is akin to the speech that I made when we debated it, which I've just lost. Excuse me, just bear with me a second. I just really want to make the point that I do not believe we should be compelling people to do something without proper informed consent. This electoral register will not only be used as an electoral register, it will be used for other purposes, including jury service. So I probably will be the only person that votes against this particular piece of legislation, but I just wanted to put on record why that is the case. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Deputy. Deputy Scott.
Sir, I'm going to assure my fellow Deputy, Helen Miles, she won't be the only person voting against this, because I am uncomfortable about the way in which personal details are published, and I sometimes believe that, with respect to the Privileges and Procedures Committee, that sometimes we can be cavalier about this. I have come across situations where parliamentary privilege has been used to cover the disclosure of personal details in reports published by the PPC, which I have discussed with them. And I know that we're beginning to get used to this difference, this change in culture where we do accept that people have a right of privacy. But I don't believe that, from what I've seen, in terms of that particular attention, that we're quite there yet. So because of that discomfort, I won't support this proposition.
Thank you, Deputy. Does Deputy Sadio, you're right on?
You predicted well, sir. I was hovering over the button. Sir, I think we've already had the main debate on this, is the starting point that I would come from. So I get the fact that there might be members who feel so strongly that they will also vote against this. I almost come at it from the other angle. So whilst I do think confidentiality and data protection and opting in are all really important things, we do have to realise that there is something else at stake here, which is the wider democratic process. This isn't just about elections. It's also about how people participate in the wider democratic conversation and dialogue that should be an ongoing thing that doesn't just happen at election times. And it's entirely normal all around the world for activists to actually be able to consult on electoral roll and to conduct political activity on a rolling basis, either as a party or as a campaign group. And as somebody who was involved as a campaigner before I got involved in elected to this assembly, sir, I think that having access to the role, especially for members of the public who are thinking about standing for election in the future, I think that this is going to be retrograde for those individuals. So we know, for example, at the moment, probably shouldn't reveal all the secrets, but it's possible to go to the library, as the Constable of St Saviour's has said. I think it is a legal matter, actually, because I think the law says that a copy has to be made every year and submitted to the library, and that an up-to-date copy has to be made available to anyone going to the parish hall. So until the 17th of March, in a week or so, less than a week, anybody in the island has the right to go to their parish hall and ask to see an electoral roll, and they can ask to see that roll by name of person, or they can ask for it by street name. And that will cease to be the case after the 17th of March. So that means that those who wish to prepare for elections in the future, who may be wanting to dip their toes into a particular constituency, thinking, do I know enough people in this constituency? Are there names that I should go to? They won't be able to do that anymore. And I think that will actually favour incumbents, sir, because the incumbents will have probably, a list of 20 names, hopefully, that they know that they can go to, they know where people live. But if you're a newcomer, you won't have the ability to do that until, I think, you only get given the candidates list after the nomination day, which is highly problematic from a democratic point of view. And that's the other thing that's not being considered here. I also have a niggling question, and until we see the electoral roll, so to speak, we're not going to see the electoral roll, but until a candidates list is published, we're not going to get a feel for who's been missed off the register. And I think that's going to be an issue potentially. We have to trust the automatic voter registration system. But are there people who are currently unknown to the system for whatever reason, who are just not registered for whatever reason with Social Security, or with their rates? They maybe rent a room off somebody, but they've not had their name put on the rates on the form, but who have lived in Jersey for longer than a year, maybe for a bit longer than that, in fact, who, when we knock on the door and they say, oh, actually, I'm not registered to vote, and say, well, how long have you lived in Jersey? They say, well, I've been here 4 years. And you say, well, you should be on the register. It's very difficult for the candidate to check whether that's the case. So I'm hoping that's not the case, but we might see that there are teething problems in the next few months. And I think if that is the case, it will be necessary for PPC and the Electoral Authority to respond to those points, sir.
Thank you. Attorney General.
It's proving to be one of those days, I'm afraid. I apologise to the Connotar, but he asked about the library, and I said it wasn't a question of law. It is, in fact. The requirement to place a copy of the register with the librarian of the Jersey Library is set out in Article 11, paragraph 2 of the law as presently enacted, but that provision is repealed, deleted by these amendments.
Could I ask a follow-up, sir? I don't know if this is a point at all, but given the fact that it will no longer be a requirement going forward, is it still in order for the library to keep the register for historic purposes? So could one go to the library and see an out-of-date list, or would the library be required to also get rid of that for data protection purposes?
Can you answer that?
I don't think I can answer that.
Thank you. Deputy Renner.
A full house of St Brelade deputies, and in case the good folk of St Brelade are worried that the entire delegation of St Brelade's deputies is against, or has problems rather with this, I want to reassure them that I stand in full support of the changes being proposed. I want to make the point, I know that there's in a sense two classes of opposition here. Deputy Miles has a very clear position she articulated before, which is that the underlying data will capture people who will have to be on it whether they like it or not, and therefore they will have to do things like jury duty. I have personally never found that a problem. You are summoned to jury duty. There are reasons where you may not have to do it, but it is part of a civic duty, and I don't have a problem with it being something that you can't preemptively opt out of. And in terms of the sort of wider issues around it, I mean, I want to focus back on the issues that made us pass this in the first place, which is that this is a significant improvement in administrative efficiency around the conduct of elections. And I have in mind somebody who at the polling station those long years ago came from the polling station and said that they hadn't been able to vote because they thought a family member had filled in the form. I can't remember now if they hadn't filled it in properly or whether they'd failed to fill it in at all, but they hadn't in any case been able to vote, and they were distraught about that because they weren't able to support me. And had they done so, that would have been one more. And since I think Deputy Scott finished only a handful of votes ahead of me, that might have closed the gap a little. Who knows? But I think that increase in administrative efficiency is welcome. It's saving us money. It creates a slightly different situation with respect to our knowledge of the electorate, but we are still able to canvass other databases such as telephone directories and so on to find out who lives in our area and whether somebody we know lives in our area. So I think that overall the wins are considerably greater than the perhaps slightly minor potential drawbacks. We've already voted it through, and this is the commencement date proposition, is it not? And therefore I hope we support it, and we really will have everybody on the electoral roll who should be on it.
Thank you, Deputy. Deputy Jean.
Thank you. It was just a question, a follow-up for the AG, because I just to clarify, regarding the access to the electoral roll in the library, or everybody having access to that. What about when in a domestic abuse situation and people are not wanting to advertise their addresses? How much information will be on this access information? I was a bit confused about what will be available to the public.
Well, nothing will be if these amendments are made. The list will be confidential. It won't even be seen by candidates. So those issues won't arise if this is enacted.
Does anyone else wish to speak on this draft amendment act? Deputy Rob Ward.
Thank you, sir. Just to say, I think one of the important points was made regards the fact that 16-year-olds, through their school data, will now automatically be on the register. We talk so much about encouraging young people to vote. This is a huge step forward for that. and we can say publicly, you are registered to vote, use your vote at 16, because it doesn't happen everywhere in the world. And that is the next generation coming through of voters who hopefully will get into the habit of voting. That's the way in which we increase our turnout and get people to come to vote. So I think it's very important. I did have a question about what's the collective noun for a group of St Brelade's deputies, but perhaps that's inappropriate, so thank you.
Thank you, Deputy. Does anyone else wish to speak on this matter? Constable St Martin.
Thank you. As former chair of PPC, who brought this forward in the early stages, I'm delighted that we've got this today. It's a great leap forward. We're often told in the parishes that we're so behind the times and everything's paper-based. Well, then we go with government and we do this, which is fantastic. Nobody will be left off. And I'm glad the Deputy Ward mentioned JCG, because I was on a panel with them last week, which was an amazing experience, terrifying but amazing. And we told them all there that they should go out and vote when they were, and that they would automatically be on the register, and they didn't have to worry about, you know, their parents, carers, whoever, forgetting to register them. So I think this is a great step forward, and I'd just like to thank everybody involved. And I just hope it works. Thank you.
Thank you, Constable. Does anyone else wish to speak on this matter? I call upon the Chair of PPC to reply. Chair of PPC.
Thank you, sir. I'd like to thank the Constable of St Brelade's for his kind words. And obviously, as I understand it, the Secretary of the Committee, after requesting this week's edition, is satisfied that everything is now in place and the parishes will be content with the way forward. Deputy Miles, I understand Deputy Miles's concerns about not having the provision for an opt-out. I am sure that future PPC can investigate her concerns, and I'm sure will be debated in the next term. Because once the register is set up, those sort of problems will be easy discussed. The Constable of St Saviour's, the library will no longer give that information to the public. That is absolutely clear, as has been confirmed by the AG. Deputy Tadier, prospective candidates can currently access the register to check that their nominees are in their constituency, which obviously they won't be able to do. So I tend to agree with Deputy Tadier that it will make it slightly harder for the new candidates. And this was something that I did actually raise at PPC. I can't remember whether the Deputy was there with us on that occasion. Thank you. So the reason for making these changes are to make it easier for people to vote by automatically including anyone who is entitled on the base electoral register, and to increase the democracy of our electoral process by removing barriers to voting. AVR is widely used in the Netherlands, Poland, Portugal, Sweden, Germany and Canada, and successful pilots were run last year in Wales, which now intends a full rollout in time for the 2027 local elections. The Welsh pilots saw expanded registers and improved youth inclusion. We expect that the register will be expanded here in Jersey to around 70,000 people, and hope that a majority of those come out to vote on Sunday the 7th of June. So I maintain the proposition and call for the appel.
Thank you, Chair. The appel has been called for. Members are invited to return to their seats. And I ask the greffier to open the voting. If all members have the opportunity of casting their votes, I ask the greffier to close the voting. Announce that the Commencement Act has been adopted. 43 votes for, 2 votes contra. Yes.
Those members voting contra, Deputies Miles and Scott.
Next item is curbing growth of the public sector. End-to-end review of government processes, lodged by Deputy Scott. The main respondent is the Chief Minister. I ask the greffier to read the proposition.
The States are asked to decide whether they are of opinion to request the Chief Minister to commission an end-to-end holistic review by the Chief Executive Officer of executive government processes, including A, pay and management structures, and B, performance frameworks. Such review to supplement the proposals for curbing public sector growth scheduled to be published by the Government of Jersey's Chief Executive Officer in February 2026, and to inform the next Council of Ministers and the Budget Government Plan 2027 to 2030.
Deputy Scott.
Sir, has this proposition been seconded?
Oh, well, we get to that in a minute, I think. You've got to make your speech first.
Oh, really? Right. Okay. I'll try not to make it too long. Right. So, I appreciate our members are probably getting tired. So this proposition calls for something that I believe should already be happening. It's a full end-to-end review of certain or a number of executive government processes. It is essential if we are serious about curbing public sector growth and setting a credible foundation for the Government Plan 2027 to 2030. Let us be absolutely clear. This proposition is not about quick fixes or headline-driven cuts. Blanket pay freezes, recruitment squeezes, and ad hoc reductions do not solve systemic problems. They address symptoms, not causes, and in doing so, disrupt services, fail to tackle inefficiency, and they do nothing to address absenteeism or improve productivity. We have tried those approaches before, and they don't work. What does work is examining how work actually flows through government, where value is created, where it is lost, and where duplication and red tape have taken root. End-to-end reviews deliver exactly that. They strip out waste, clarify roles, align incentives, and give staff the tools and authority they need to do their jobs properly. Other jurisdictions have used these reviews to reduce bottlenecks, strengthen accountability, and make sustained savings without undermining services. Jersey should expect no less. So we are not debating this in a vacuum. The Fiscal Policy Panel and the Control and Auditor General have issued repeated warnings about rising expenditure and inadequate reserves. Public finances are under structural strain. Core staffing and absenteeism costs continue to rise. These pressures will not disappear on their own. The Chief Executive has been tasked with producing proposals on public sector growth, yet progress has been slow, and what we have seen so far focuses on organisational charts rather than process improvement. If a genuine holistic review were underway, this proposition would be unnecessary, but there is no evidence that such work has been commissioned, and nothing in recent ministerial statements comments suggest otherwise. Both recent public comments from both the Chief Minister and the Chief Executive highlights the very issues this proposition seeks to address. The lack of prioritisation, the strain on resources, and the tendency for government to take on responsibilities it cannot deliver effectively. But those comments must not be interpreted as shifting blame on us. The responsibility for fixing internal inefficiency lies within the system itself, and addressing internal bureaucracy is squarely within the remit of the Chief Executive. Members of the Public Accounts Committee will be familiar with the importance of reviews of processes. The Control and Auditor General has been calling for systemic improvement for years, and that work remains outstanding. So consider the scale of the challenge. The public sector now costs over £670 million in staff alone. We did receive a recent email about absenteeism, and I agree with the Assistant Chief Minister, Deputy Ferry, that it overestimated absenteeism costs. I have estimated them to cost about £26 million a year. And at 8.8 days per employee, that's higher than Guernsey, higher than the Isle of Man, and even the UK public sector. The Health Insurance Fund will fall below safe levels by 2029 without intervention, and staff surveys show progress, yes, but also persistent uncertainty around roles and career pathways. These are not minor issues. They are symptoms of symptoms of a system that has not been reviewed holistically, that has not aligned its structures with its objectives, and that has allowed inefficiency to become embedded. My proposition proposes that the review includes two core issues: pay and management structures and performance frameworks that measure outcomes, not activity. These are areas where excessive management layers and concerns raised in Be Heard surveys can be addressed that should have the effect of empowering staff while reducing absenteeism and reducing costs in a way that supports outcomes rather than frustrates them. There could be other end-to-end reviews in areas of weakness identified by the Controller and Auditor General, of course, such as procurement governance, grant and subsidy management, and organisational oversight arrangements. So this sort of review is needed now, not later, and not for a headline, not for a political soundbite, but to ensure government operates efficiently, sustainably, and in a way that delivers real value for islanders. So this proposition is not radical, it is responsible, it is overdue. And it is a credible way to support the Chief Executive's proposals to achieve sustainable reform. I urge members to support it for the sake of our public finances, our workforce, and the service the public deserves.
Thank you, Deputy. Is the proposition seconded? Yes, sir. Thank you. Does anyone want to speak on the proposition? Minister Treasury and Resources.
Thank you, sir. Sir, this proposition calls for an end-to-end holistic review of government processes, but it does not fully explain what this is meant to include. Government is a very complex organisation, and attempting to review every process in one exercise would be both major undertaking and resource heavy, made harder by a very broad and undefined scope of the proposal. It also refers to reviewing pay structures and management structures, which are not processes but matters of policy and organisational design. Amending pay structures is very likely, in fact almost certain, to involve consultation with employees and unions. Combining a potentially broad range of very different areas risks confusion and makes effective reform far more difficult. Sir, we fully recognise the need to curb public sector growth, and we are already delivering on our efforts to do so. Savings of £47 million are in train. The external recruitment freeze has prevented around 500 additional posts being filled, avoiding some £31 million in annual costs. Over 1,000 unfunded roles have been removed, and spending on consultants and agency staff has reduced by nearly £21 million. As a result, growth has slowed significantly and the workforce has reduced in real terms outside of essential frontline services, which, of course, have been preserved. As I said earlier this week, it's a very easy thing for people to say that we should just go and take large numbers of staff out of the organisation, but that is simply not straightforward, with employment law implications and the implications for the economy of a large number of hundreds of people being made redundant overnight. So these things have to be considered very, very carefully. And I would just like to say, sir, I would also just like to add, we have to remember that discussions like this about staff, about workforce, about reduction, really does create uncertainty and a degree of anxiety among our workforce, some of whom do work, well, a great many of whom work very, very hard. And I think we need to avoid a sense of them feeling that they are not appreciated or indeed resented. Work on internal process improvement is also already underway under the Chief Executive, precisely the work the proposition seeks to mandate. To curb growth effectively, we need a targeted, well-planned and evidence-based programme, not a broad, undefined and potentially duplicative review. For these reasons, sir, I believe that the proposition is unnecessary and overly prescriptive, and I would urge members to reject it. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Minister. Deputy Moore.
Thank you, sir. I agree with much of the Treasury Minister's comments in her speech, so I will try to be brief. However, and I also do agree with her that we respect the intention behind the Deputy's proposals here. However, over the past 10 years, there has been both workforce modernisation and the target operating model, both of which, as the Treasury Minister has alluded, have caused great uncertainty for the many hard-working public servants in the island as they went through those long processes and waited for the outcomes of the reviews. When we got to the target operating model, I heard from many, many people that they actually wished we'd adopted workforce modernisation because as difficult as they had found that, it felt, once they'd got to the target operating model, that it was a clearer and more defined process. So I would be wholly against going through a situation like that again. There is more than enough data that has been captured through those processes already and enough information for that work to be considered. Indeed, that work started back in 2022 under the former Chief Executive, who was offering and considering improvements to the top level structures. And the current Chief Executive is well aware of that work. In January 2024, we were told that this government would be one of action. No more reviews, we heard, sir. And I'm sure the Assistant Minister, in bringing this proposition, is well aware of those promises that this government made to the public when they slammed on the brakes and actually put into reverse much of what was going on at the beginning of 2024 when we experienced a change of government. So, sir, the Deputy is right. Progress has been slow. I would contend, however, that this is down to the distraction of changing government and a failure to set clear and accountable performance measures. Reviews take time. As we've already mentioned, the two reviews, the workforce modernisation and the target operating model, took extensive periods of time, taking up the many, many hours of civil service time as well to conduct those reviews and to gather the information that they did, as well as causing a distraction. So, sir, I cannot possibly support this proposition, although I do agree that more needs to be done to consider not just curbing the growth, sir, but actually challenging the services that we deliver, what can be stopped, what can be simplified. In fact, going back to what officers were tasked with doing back in 2022. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy. Deputy Feltham.
Thank you, sir. I also was reminded of the Workforce Modernisation Programme and Target Operating Model work that when I read this proposition. Both of those things, as the previous speaker has said, proved to be costly, inefficient, and definitely did not deliver the outcomes that were promised. In fact, I think that the outcomes out of those reviews have led to some of the issues that we now see in terms of our health workforce. I know in terms of some areas, sectors of our health workforce that accepted workforce modernisation, some didn't. There was an awful amount of confusion. Some people that work in health ended up under civil service contracts that were inappropriate for the work that they did because of the workforce modernisation programme. And then we come to the target operating model, which caused so much upset, created so much work. And I, as a union representative, was one of the people that sat through, I think it was every department's target operating model presentation. I saw how much upset was caused. I saw the effects that it had on the government's ability to attract and retain staff. And that's something that we cannot lose sight of, because where there's lots of waste and unnecessary expenditure is when we can't recruit and retain the right people. And that we are reliant on expensive agency workers, we're reliant on locums, we're reliant on people that come in on short-term contracts. So we need to not fall down that particular rabbit hole again. And I would like to ask the Deputy, in her summing up, why she thinks that what she is proposing will achieve a different outcome to what we've seen in the past, which quite clearly hasn't worked. But I will speak in terms of my own department. My own department, Employment, Social Security and Housing, is incredibly efficiently run. My chief officer has done a lot of work to ensure that we are meeting our efficiencies as a department. And I do want to just say as a minister how much I respect that work that our senior officers have been doing and are doing to drive efficiencies within government. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Deputy. Deputy Ferry.
Thank you, sir. And I rise as Vice Chair of the States Employment Board, and I'm glad that the move of this proposition cited the email that we received the other day with lots of inaccurate statements about the cost of absenteeism. So I want to focus my speech on that. Hopefully members have had a chance to read that response. But basically, we have lots of campaigns in place to support people who are off either short-term or long-term ill sickness, and support them in their return to work, and remind staff that we are a family-friendly employer. We can provide flexible working solutions, particularly for working parents. Not only does the legislation demand that we do, we actively have policies to make sure that parents are properly supported in the workplace, and if they're returning to work after maternity leave or parental leave, then they are properly supported in doing so. So at our last States Employment Board meeting, we received a paper concerning performance and management structures. So there is lots of good work which is going on in this area to make sure that our workforce, we are getting the most out of them. They are working together. I still get the feeling when I walk around Union Street building that people are really glad to work there. They feel that they're supported. They enjoy working in that environment. And what they like most of all, particularly as we're predominantly in one building, is the fact that they can interact with each other rather than having to email or call. They just go up or down the floor, and they are working better together than they probably ever have in the past. So I just want to say that there is lots of work, good work going on in this area. We've received a lot of that information through the States Employment Board, and I have a habit of not voting for propositions where the work is already in train. So as a consequence, I won't be supporting this proposition.
Thank you, Deputy. Does anyone else wish to speak on this proposition? No one else wishes to speak. I call upon Deputy Scott to reply. Deputy Scott.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for all members' contributions. I think there have been some contradictions in terms of some of these speeches, but let's just focus on the actual work that's being done. And I think it is important to celebrate success. And I think it also has been helpful for contributors to highlight some of the positive work that's being done. And I'm not denying that any of that is taking place. The real question is whether that's enough. And I've actually can hear what Deputy Moore and Deputy Felton have said, this aversion, and I was asked to specifically speak to this, that a previous chief executive introduced a target operating model and did things in a way that didn't work. But that doesn't mean that just because something has been done the wrong way doesn't mean it can't be done the right way. So he actually introduced a target operating model. I'm not even, I think States members have actually seen the proposals, or at least some flavour of what's being proposed, and I invite you to consider whether those proposals are more structural, organisational, whether that could be compared in that way, rather than some of the things which I think are evidence of a concern that something may not be working quite right. Now, I could skip the bit about pay structures and these things on the basis of what the concerns, and I understand the concerns about not wanting to upset the apple cart and all those things. It could also be regarded as not addressing what is a potential issue of there being excessive management layers, which indeed could create red tape for people. I mean, people who are actually employing our organisation and don't really feel that they have access to people as efficiently as they might. And indeed, I did have a conversation with the Chief Executive saying, why don't we just collect these ideas? How can the organisation be improved? What are the innovative things members of staff could say could be done? I didn't hear anything about that work being done, by the way. But the other thing that we've talked about, and Deputy Ferry referred to, was he was mentioning the government as a great place to work, and I do believe that for many it is. But then that doesn't explain these higher rates of absenteeism. That doesn't explain the lack of morale that's been identified in the Be Heard surveys. And I believe that Deputy Moore did refer, which he actually referred to, if I read my notes, that what was important was clear and accountable performance measures. Well, hello, the proposition does mention that there could be a focus on that particular area. Performance frameworks, are they working? I mean, for example, I have come across an inconsistency in terms of people's performance and whether views are sought on people's performance in different departments. So why is that inconsistent? And would it not be helpful? And if that feedback isn't being sought and actually dealt with in an appropriate way, then then how are people being informed? Similarly, I have in the past submitted a written question: which departments are even giving performance reviews? And there is an inconsistency in different areas. So what's going on there? So so I'm going to conclude, Sarah, because I know that States members, it's been a long day and it's time, of saying that we need to, I'm going to bring back, to the core question that has enough been done? Yes, progress has been made, but does more need to be done? And has that been identified in terms of that particular element of performance frameworks? Now, I don't know whether I can just say, right, with this proposition and propose an A and B separately, I'll seek advice there. Because, and I certainly want to also say that I wasn't trying to be overly rigid. It was an inclusion thing. I wasn't saying, you can only do this. It was inviting a bit more of, if you like, transparency, when the Chief Minister's presenting his proposals to the next States Assembly, to say what work he is doing, and actually do some work that actually comes with suggested in terms of process. So I'll just wait for your response.
I think it needs to be taken in as a whole, this proposition,
Okay.
Deputy Scott.
Sorry, so shall we just get on with it, sir?
Do you call for the appel?
Yeah, thank you.
The appel has been called for. Thank you, Deputy. Members are invited to return to their seats. I ask the greffier to open the voting. before members have the chance to cast their votes. I ask the greffier to close the voting. As the proposition has been rejected, 2 votes for, 42 votes contra.
Can we have the two, sir?
Those members voting for, Deputies Scott and Andrews.
Sir,
I'll move on.
Sir, I'm mindful that the chair of PPC had suggested we break at 5:30. I'm in two minds of whether we should just start or we should break early. I don't know what members think.
If you're in two minds, there's no proposition, is there?
I was hoping that your wisdom
Oh, I see. Well, you can't rely on
may
that.
intervene.
You can't rely on that.
May I attest the mood of the Assembly, and as the, I believe the next proposition is the last one, or one more?
There's 2 more. Well, do members want to carry on? There's lots of
I'd
yes.
like to propose.
Yes, you're the president. Yes.
The proposition that we're about to discuss, I'd rather that we break and then come back promptly, as you like.
Well, should we do that, shall we?
To go back.
So do members want to come back in half an hour or in 40 minutes? Half an hour. Okay. In that case, the Assembly is adjourned until 10 to 6.